King famously said, "Wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows." Our next speaker is Bill Van Wagenen. He is the editor of the Mormon Worker newspaper, and if any of you have had a chance to check that out, I highly recommend it. Will is also a peace activist, and he has spent time doing human rights work in Iraq. Will?
All right. Well, first off, I guess I'd just say I appreciate everyone sticking around this long. It's starting to look like going to church here, almost 3 hours long maybe, and so I appreciate you guys having the patience to stick around so there's still a crowd to talk to. I just want to say a few things briefly about Gaza, a few things very briefly about Iraq, and a few things very briefly about Afghanistan, and then we'll get you guys out of here. But recently, I'm sure you guys know about what happened in Gaza near Christmas time. There was a couple-week offensive that the Israeli military did, ended up killing about 1,300 Gazans. And to be honest, the situation there these days has taken really a turn for the worse. Just to review a few of the points, there was a long-standing truce in place about 6 months long between Hamas and the Israeli military, in which there was essentially no violence between the two sides. On November 4th, when the presidential election was going on here in the United States, the Israeli military did an operation into Gaza where they killed 5 Hamas militants in an airstrike. And that's what broke the truce. In response to that, Hamas began firing rockets into Israel. And it was deeply saddening to me that Israeli spokespersons, as well as U.S. politicians, including Harry Reid from Nevada, that they all were able to go on to television and with straight faces say that it was Hamas who had broken the truce. That President Bush could say, of course, it's Hamas's fault that now Gaza is being bombed by F-16s. It was Israel who broke the truce because they were not interested in having a truce. They're not interested in having a peaceful solution. So during that operation, according to the testimony of Israeli soldiers, they were ordered to go into different neighborhoods in Gaza and basically kill any person that they saw. They'd break down the door of a house and were given orders just to kill everyone inside, including women, children, anyone they saw. In addition, again, the F-16s would come and drop, large bombs on different apartment buildings, make the entire thing collapse and crush all the people inside. The Israelis also used white phosphorus, which is a banned weapon according to international law, which killed a lot of Palestinians as well. Again, 1,300 Gazans were killed during that time, majority of which were women and children and civilians. What was further depressing is that there were Israeli elections that were held recently, and the new Israeli government that has been formed, the coalition, is a very right-wing government. I, for a long time, thought you couldn't be any more right-wing than Likud and Benjamin Netanyahu. But now there's an ultra-nationalist right-wing party that's part of the coalition, and they openly advocate transferring all the Israeli Arabs out of Israel, and they've openly come out and said, we don't support a two-state solution, and they basically advocate continuing to colonize the West Bank. And in my view, that conflict is going to end essentially with the Israelis committing a genocide against the Palestinians that are still in Gaza and the West Bank. And of course, all of this has happened without any objection or criticism from the Obama administration. They've been quite supportive of all of this. And the last thing is that the Israeli government recently announced that they're going to begin building a new large settlement block that will connect the settlements that are currently in the West Bank with Jerusalem, and that will divide the West Bank into two, so that essentially there's no way for a Palestinian state to be created. And that was just announced this last week in Haaretz, and again, no objections from the U.S. government. With regards to Iraq, thank heavens the violence has been reduced quite a bit there recently. But the unfortunate thing is that the United States has essentially been successful in their attempts to establish a pro-U.S. government in Iraq, establish permanent military bases there, and the way it looks, they're going to be able to leave about 50,000 U.S. troops in Iraq indefinitely and privatize Iraq's oil industry. That's the culmination of many, many years of effort and many, many Iraqis that the United States has killed, beginning in 1991 when the U.S. Very viciously destroyed Iraq's civilian infrastructure, water treatment plants, power plants, etc. Then imposed sanctions on Iraq from that period of time, 1991 until 2003, which led to the unnecessary death of probably 400,000 to 500,000 Iraqi children. Then, as we all know, the shock and awe bombing in 2003, which killed roughly 100,000 people, according to the best estimates. And since the war began in 2003, there have been roughly 500,000 Iraqis who have killed, both from U.S. actions and as a result of the sectarian war which broke out in Iraq that, in fact, was encouraged by the United States rather than prevented. So now that the violence there is kind of coming slowly to an end, the United States has been successful to have what they want, which is, again, a client state in the heart of the Middle East, where most of the world's energy resources lie. In Afghanistan, the situation in Afghanistan, that history is obviously a sad one. Ever since the United States provoked deliberately the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan in 1979, that country has been racked by civil war, and the United States now is perpetuating that civil war. When the U.S. first came, because the Taliban government was so oppressive and terrible, being desperate as they were, most people in Afghanistan were very happy to see the United States come. And of course, 8 years later, most have kind of changed their mind on that. They see the United States doing airstrikes that unnecessarily kill Afghan civilians all the time. Even Hamid Karzai, who is essentially the U.S. Puppet ruler of Afghanistan, has been very, very critical of these airstrikes that the U.S. government continues to insist on doing, where at times entire wedding parties of 50 and 100 people have been killed from these Predator drones. And of course, we were all hoping for an improvement of sorts when President Obama was elected. And just a few days after he took office, the airstrikes that have been going on in Afghanistan were then accelerated into Pakistan as well. And even just yesterday, there were 13 people killed in a U.S. airstrike in Pakistan. So rather than ending the wars or being an anti-war politician or president, President Obama is, of course, surging the number of troops into Afghanistan and expanding the war into Pakistan. So, at any rate, even though when the Iraq War first started, there were large protests and thousands or hundreds of thousands of people were coming out because that seemed like a very pivotal, important time, it seems to me that in regards to war issues, right now is just as urgent. The situation is just as dire and just as terrible, although it seems like this issue was kind of maybe